Obi-Wan and Anakin have been sent alongside Pantoran Chairman Cho and Pantoran Senator Chuchi to investigate the disappearance of clone forces on the ice planet of Autoplutonia. Cho claims ownership of this world despite it seemingly being uninhabited, but Obi-Wan reminds him that this is the Senate's decision, not theirs, hence why they have brought Chuchi with them. Obi-Wan leaves Anakin to look after the Senator while he and the clones secure the base, who discover that all the clones have been mysteriously wiped out. Cho assumes it's the Separatists, but Obi-Wan notes that the method isn't like them. Rex informs Obi-Wan that his clone scouts have discovered a Separatist base on the other side of the ridge, which they go and investigate. They discover that the Separatist droids have suffered the same fate. Anakin notices some large footprints in the snow, while Obi-Wan discovers a Separatist transmission log that shows a native creature attacking the droids. The log reveals that the droids were investigating the Southern Canyon, giving the Jedi a lead on where to go next. Cho is certain that the Separatists are behind this, despite Chuchi noticing that there is no evidence of droid involvement. She hopes that there is a peaceful resolution if it is indeed not the Separatists, but Cho would rather die for his people. The Jedi notice an unnatural reflection on one of the cliff sides of the canyon, deducing that their presence is known to whoever they are looking for, with the pair arriving at a village soon after. Obi-Wan doesn't want to provoke the inhabitants, as their clones and droids had done. Anakin thinks they should have brought 3PO along to communicate, but Obi-Wan has more patience. They are guided by the leader, Tai Sen, into a hut, where they try to explain to the Jedi that the droids attacked them. Obi-Wan states in return that they come in peace, which Anakin visualizes on a parchment. It is now night as the Jedi leave. They return back to the base and inform the others of the situation. Cho can't believe that the planet is inhabited, accusing the creatures, called the Talz, of being trespassers. Despite them not being advanced enough to have space travel, Cho still claims ownership of them and the planet. Chuchi states that due to there being life forms on the planet, the Senate now has control of the situation, but Cho wants to attack the Talz and claim the planet, despite the Jedi telling the Talz they would make peace and not retaliate, having planned a meeting between them and Cho. As they approach the meeting point, Cho orders the clones to attack once the Talz make their presence known. Obi-Wan retaliates, stating there will be no attack and this planet is not under his control, revealing that Talz scouts have already been monitoring them. The meeting takes place within the Separatist base, which has become a neutral ground, with Phi Sen hoping that they come in peace but wants them to leave. However, Cho gets 3PO to translate that Pantora has jurisdiction over this planet, with Phi Sen's response to this being war. The Jedi try and see if Chuchi can do anything to stop Cho's illegal actions. She is able to get Pantora's Speaker of the Assembly to approve that the Jedi Council can intervene. They work on doing this, while Cho takes the clones to battle. The Talz are able to gain the upper hand, killing Cho's aides before fatally wounding the chairman himself, while Chuchi has been given permission to negotiate peace with the Talz, though Chuchi hopes that the Jedi can do it for her, but they cannot, as a representative of the Pantorans themselves is needed to end the conflict. Rex is cornered by the Talz as he flees with the dying chairman, as Chuchi and the Jedi arrive just in time before Rex and the remaining clones get slaughtered. Cho's final act is that he wants Chuchi to avenge him, though Chuchi does not do this and informs him that she will make peace with the Talz, with him dying shortly after. Chuchi is able to negotiate peace with the Talz, with both of them wanting to live for their people. Chuchi states that they will leave Autoplutonia to the protection of the Talz and will recognize them as free and equal people. Obi-Wan gives her one final piece of advice: make the peace last. The production code for Trespass is CW125. The episode was written by Stephen Melching, with Henry Gilroy and Scott Murphy getting additional credits as series and supervising writers. Brian Kalin O'Connell was the director, while the episode started with Catherine Winder as producer, but Cary Silver would ultimately see it through to the finish line. While this story was the 25th episode to be produced, it would be brought forward in the final release order for Season 1, airing as the 15th episode of the first season on January 30th, 2009. Arrogance diminishes wisdom. Unlike a lot of past episodes, this episode actually contains 100% new shots created for its newsreel sequence, despite it being the first, and only, part of the story. This story came about as a pitch directly from George Lucas, who wanted to do a classic Western trope where people who are deemed to be primitive and native have their homeland invaded by a more advanced, superior military force, and how said people would fight back against this. This concept would also put the Jedi at odds, as while they have agreed to become generals for the Republic in the Clone Wars, they still have their duty as peacekeepers, showing us a glimpse into how the Jedi acted before the Clone Wars, with them stepping back in this matter, with Senator Chuchi having to solve the situation due to the Talz being at war with the Pantorans. Ultimately, she ends up being the victor of the story, who puts peace above everything else, including herself. The Jedi snow gear was based off of the jacket that Han Solo wore in The Empire Strikes Back on Hoth. They didn't want to create too realistic hair for the hood material, so instead created a more graphically textured shape that they animated to react to the environment. The snow clone design is inspired by original trilogy concept art from The Empire Strikes Back for the Hoth Snowtroopers, created by Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, and John Mollo. Sadly, this design would never be used again within the series, with snow planets being a rarity for stories that feature battles with clones. Russell Chong went through a design process to decipher a look for the snow clones, before Dave Filoni ultimately wanted them to look more like that original trilogy concept. The Pantorans featured in this episode are traced back to Baron Papanoida, who was a minor character in Revenge of the Sith, portrayed by George Lucas himself. This episode exposes some of the politics from their world, being a moon of Autoplutonia called Pantora. Senator Chuchi's design is based on an unused Padme costume design for The Phantom Menace by Ian McCaig, though they decided to make her closer to Ahsoka in terms of age to help her stand out compared to Padme. Another reusage of concept art is with Chairman Cho's aides, who are repurposed from initial Attack of the Clones concepts for Count Dooku, before Christopher Lee was ultimately cast as the Sith Lord. Autoplutonia's design aesthetic is inspired by concept art of the Hoth Badlands that had more of a blue tone compared to the final depiction of the planet, though the overly blue aesthetic would be toned down for Autoplutonia, but they were able to have a more stylized take on an ice world due to not being limited to what the snow looked like on location. The more blue version of Hoth did finally get featured within the 2015 Star Wars Battlefront DLC map, Twilight, on Hoth. The Republic base's interior asset is of a similar design to the Rishi Moon base featured in CW114. The version used for this episode would be repurposed for CW201, The Hidden Enemy, that would air after this episode. Inside the base, a clone is seen pushing something that features traditional wheels. This is the second notable time this is the case within the Clone Wars, after CW 109, Shadow of Malevolence, featured traditional wheeled office chairs. The Separatist base seems to have been designed as a mobile one, though this does not get brought up in the episode. Its design is similar to the MTT trains featured within CW 111, Destroy Malevolence. Autoplutonia, unlike Hoth, does not have rocks or snow. It's meant to just be ice. This causes questions like what do the Talz mounts, the Narglach, eat, as well as what do they burn to make a fire, with Filoni stating that perhaps somewhere under the ice there could be patches of grass, taking inspiration from one of the Ralph McQuarrie Hoth paintings that depicted Tauntauns under the ice eating grass. Though he also states that perhaps they're burning bones from unseen creatures that also inhabit the planet that have similar qualities to wood. Killian Plunkett ultimately reminds us that we shouldn't overthink it too much, as getting too logistical hurts. They leaned into a more anime aesthetic when it came to effects like the speed of snow trails. By this point in production, the development team had improved their skills, with the episode having some very smooth, subtle animation, as well as each character having the cold breath come out of their mouths as they talk. George Lucas wanted high snow density with a lot of whiteout shots. Joel Aaron made the different snow variations throughout the episode match the current mood of the story at a given point. The Battle of Christophsis melody is reprised for the end of the episode, but has been recreated more soberly and solemnly. This episode gives a backstory for the Talz, a species that originally cameoed in the Mos Eisley Cantina within 1977's A New Hope. 3PO referring to their leader, Tai Sen, as Son of Suns is a reference to unfinalized scripts of the Star Wars movies, which mentioned a prophesized hero under the same name. This was initially associated by fans with the prequel trilogy's Chosen One prophecy from The Phantom Menace, but its use here officially separated the two. While the episode has the Talz as natives to Autoplutonia, the expanded universe had them as natives of Alzok 3, which has a similar snow biome. The Republic Heroes game would also set a level on the planet, with them utilising footage of Autoplutonia from the show in a newsreel to represent the planet. The Talz could be a spiritual successor to the idea of Hoth having snow people, which was brought up during a story conference for The Empire Strikes Back before ultimately being replaced with the Wampa. Killian Plunkett, who created the Talz Clone Wars design, stated how he didn't think they would have been so vicious and imposing. The Talz coming out of the ice in the ground is reminiscent of the retail droids doing the same thing in CW 118, The New Padawan, which became the first section of the Clone Wars movie. Before the Clone Wars, the Talz were considered for depiction within Revenge of the Sith, where they were given additional limbs and were potentially attributed to be natives of Mygeeto. Though this would ultimately be cut from the final film, this would suggest that Lucas had them being natives to a snow biome planet in mind for a while. This is similar to how the Lerman were also considered for Revenge of the Sith as well, as being confirmed to be another native species of Mygeeto. The Talz totem poles are carved from ice, though the initial script stated that they were carved from wood, while their huts are created from bones with animal skin draped over them, with their designs being inspired by Inuit, indigenous North American and prehistoric cultures. Designer Chris Voy explained that their art and expression comes from what they have seen. 3PO drives his own Freako bike, due to them only having one seat, which in turn references a cut mention from A New Hope of him piloting a speeder being one of his 30 secondary functions. Chairman Cho references the Convention of Civilized Systems. This is the first appearance of such a Bill of Rights within the franchise. Unfortunately, the current canon continuity has not explored this concept further, though it was detailed in the unfortunately decanonized Season 1 episode guide written by Jason Fry that was released in October 2009. The bill was also briefly referenced in the also now Legends branded Clone Wars Comic Issue 7 in Service of the Republic Part 1. Anakin regards Chuchi as most impressive, echoing a future phrase he would use under his tenure as Darth Vader. When Kenobi is hugged by Thai Sen, the other Taus silently laugh in the background. An earlier plan for the episode, Spear of Influence, was for it to be a prequel to Trespass, and thus make the story arc another two-parter in a similar vein to the Toydarian arc, but this initial plan was ultimately dropped. Based on this, it can be surmised that Trespass was another favourite of George Lucas's from the first season, especially due to it being one of the first stories to get this planned prequel episode treatment, production-wise. Watching Trespass, like with both of the Mara Dun arc episodes, reminds me how these later production Season 1 episodes have an improved look to them overall, besides the additional detail in the visual effects, with them refining everything around those as well, such as the lighting and shadow use. C-3PO makes a good point about why would you want a Republic outpost on this seemingly desolate ice world when you could just leave it alone, which shows pretty early on that Cho is someone who wants to take control of areas outside of his own planet before we even meet him, with him instantly clashing with the Jedi about this. It's interesting that 3PO is featured in this story arc without Padme, especially when you think about how it seems that her and Anakin both gave each other their droids. Though this wouldn't be the last time this happens, and it isn't a strict rule that was set, so the production team are able to use 3PO as a translator character when the story requires it. The shot of the clone helmets on Pikes reminds me of a similar thing Rex and Ahsoka would do at the end of the episode Victory and Death. The animation conveys Chuchi's initial lack of confidence very well, showing her grow over the course of this episode, with her smiling at the very end being a direct contrast to how unconfident she was at the start of the episode. The episode title of Trespass is interesting because it has multiple angles to it. One with Cho that claims the Taus are the trespassers, and the other, truthful angle, is that the Pantorans are the true trespassers on the Taus' planet. I am not surprised that the Taus quickly gained the upper hand, considering their entire home is at risk here. Meanwhile, not only is Cho the only person who wants to attack them, but he and the clones aren't even fighting for their homes and way of life like the Taus are. While Chairman Cho thought he was dying for his people, his death was actually saving his people from his own actions, preventing any more of them dying because of them. So in a way, he was right to say he died for his people, but not in the context he thought it would be. Seeing the clones in snow gear makes me wonder what the Phase 2 variant could have been. Perhaps it would have been like the Galactic Marine design seen with Ki-Adi-Mundi on Maigito during Revenge of the Sith, with it even being possible that had the show not been cancelled, it could have featured a Clone Wars stylised version of those clones. I think Chuchi could have made an appearance within Padme's unfinished Clone Wars arc, potentially supporting Padme in her quest against Palpatine's office term. After the Bad Batch, however, she most likely continued to try and fight in the Senate, though I could see her eventually leaving it once it gets to a point where it's obvious to her that the Empire have stripped all of the power from it, especially considering she's clearly against all of what Palpatine is doing based on her positive relationship with Rex, with it making sense for her to leave the Senate once her position becomes useless. I imagine if she survived the Dark Times era, that she'd have probably joined the rebellion at some point, maybe even getting to work alongside Padme's daughter Leia Organa, and potentially with the speculated Papanoida character from Star Wars Underworld. If she doesn't survive the Dark Times, then I could see Palpatine pull a similar plan to what Dooku tried to do in Attack of the Clones, assassinate Senator Chuchi if her efforts singled her out as a thorn in his side. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. My current goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, so if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.